Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by and listening to this episode of fullstack.chat, a podcast where I introduce developers from around the community to talk about their products and their journeys getting to launch, or dev tool companies on to discuss how their dev tool or company can help developers create and launch products. Today's episode is with James Perkins, the founder of Unkey.dev. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of an error around the initial recording of the podcast using the software I was using, so some of the initial audio was lost. That's why I'm recording a one-off introduction for this specific episode. But go ahead and dive in and listen to James Perkins' journey into launching Unkey.dev. Stack developer and tech enthusiast who is currently senior developer educator at Clerk, user management and authentication platform designed to get auth added into your applications as quickly as possible. Today, I'm joined by James Perkins of Unkey. James and I have been friends for a long time. It's been a minute since we've talked, so we're looking forward to talking through the core theme of it, which of this show, which is Unkey and how it can help developers and what kind of developers it can help. But also hopefully have some just kind of friendly banter and catch up as the show progresses. So with that, James, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic off to you. If you can just go ahead and round out that introduction.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's good to see you. My name's James. I'm the Unkey CEO, one of the two co-founders. I previously worked at Clerk before Brian was there, but I did previously work at Clerk, which is where most people know me from. I'm just super excited to sit down and have some time with you and chat, catch up, and talk about Unkey and what we're doing.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, fun little side story tangent. At least we're going on tangents real early in the show today. I actually reached out to James at possibly working at Clerk several months before I actually joined the company when he was still there. Decided not to jump on it at the time, but fate kind of had other plans, I suppose, and now I'm at Clerk and he's not.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, James, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I remember that when you reached out, when we were talking about, hey, maybe you joining. Yeah. I'm glad that you're there now, though. I'm super excited that you ended up at Clerk. I think it's a real good fit for you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a great time. I love the people I work with. I love the kind of work that I do. I like just engaging with the community in general. And again, that's also the inspiration behind how this podcast came to be. I like building projects and stuff, not just like things that'll go on a GitHub profile, but there's a total difference between building something as like a demo project or just to show off some skills, and then building something that people are actually going to log in and start using. So it's been a great fit for me. But I'm going to pass it back to you. So one of the ways that I like to start the show off with is by asking kind of a lighthearted icebreaker question, just so this way people who are listening can get to know a little bit more about you. So the question I pulled for you today is, what's the best tech joke or meme that still makes you laugh?
Oh, great question. We use a lot of memes at work. So like our Slack is full of memes. I'm still right now the my favorite one that has been, and this might be controversial, but I don't know if you saw recently that Guillermo from Vercel called Dax from SST Lil Bro, and now that's going around as memes. I don't know if you've seen that recently, but that's been killing me. Which is probably my favorite tech meme that's come out at least in the last month. And if people haven't seen it, they should go and check out like terminal.shop, which is their coffee company, who just put out a meme of the little bro roasted coffee, and it says lightly roasted on it, which has been killing me. But yeah, we're a heavy meme company, so our memes are forever flowing.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I didn't even know that. I saw it floating around Twitter, but I didn't think anything of it. But this morning, before recording, I saw the meme coffee. I thought it was serious though. That's so hilarious. That's actually
they'll probably put it out as a coffee just for fun. But yeah, that's where it came from. It was from the original little bro comment on something that they were arguing about, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, it totally fits the theme of what I've seen Terminal Shop put out. So that's funny. All right, so the theme of the podcast, or I guess the main topic we want to talk about, is Unkey. Can you start by giving the audience an intro to what Unkey is and what kind of problems it solves?
Yeah, so Unkey is an API development platform. Essentially, the idea is it allows developers to move really quickly if they want to productionize like an API. So good example is like maybe you have like an AI product that you want to have like people have access through an API versus just the web UI, and you're trying to figure out, well, like how do I give people maybe API keys, and how do I make sure they're not using and abusing the platform? So how do I add rate limiting, or how do I add like a maybe like a use amount on the keys, and then having super rich analytical data around like how that API is being used, and making it as really as simple as possible, like 4 or 5 lines of code, and you've got API keys that you can issue, and then maybe 2 or 3 more lines of code, and you can verify those keys are actually valid for your API. Very Clerk-esque in nature, is like really, really simple to get you going. And then you kind of scale into the product. You add things just like you do with Clerk, where maybe you start with users, and then you add organizations, and then you add SSO, and then you add, two-step or whatever it might be. We kind of built the same approach. So the idea is you start with something really simple. Maybe it's just rate limiting your own application. Like maybe you are building your next application with TRPC, and you want to rate limit the amount of time someone can try and sign up or sign into your account, or maybe you want to rate limit how many times they can process a request. That might be your start entry. And then suddenly I need to productionize this, and I want API keys, and then I want a way to deploy this API, and I want to be able to secure this API, and I want to scale this API. Like all these things are built into the Unkey platform. And we're basically tackling it as a sense of like, how can we make it as easy as possible? How can we make it as fast as possible to use, and then make it super, super scalable? So like, regardless of how much you put through the system, it's never going to slow down. And yeah, that's basically what we're building.
Awesome. That was a great kind of I guess tidbit there about developers rate limiting their own APIs, only because um, as I was reading through the website, I admittedly have not tried out Unkey, although it's been one of those tools that's been on my backlog to explore for a long time now. Um, it's the initial, I guess, gut feeling that I got from it was for developers who are building tools for other developers. But it sounds like developers can even use that, the concept of API keys, to help protect their own resources. So this way things don't get bombarded.
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah, and that's kind of the idea. It's like it's twofold, right? It's one is you can productionize some API and sell that to customers or give that to users, and then secondarily, yeah, you can just like stick us in front of your application and rate limit a bunch of routes that you have, so that you don't get abuse when someone's using just the UI itself. We offer both, and we offer a bunch of other features, but those are the main two that like really kind of pull people in.
Awesome. Yeah. So, what I understand you mentioned that some of the inspiration came from your work at Clerk,
Hmm.
and you're drawing inspiration to build a product in a similar manner. Did you ever, I guess, foresee yourself building kind of an API key company for a while? Is it something that was on your radar before? Because I think Unkey has been around for about a little over a year. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yep. Just
Okay.
over a year now. And yeah, it was kind of like this. So before, I was doing DevRel, dev education, and all that kind of stuff. I was a backend developer, and I built APIs. So I built 3 main core APIs that are probably used in the United States like every single day. I built an API for basically allowing you to buy a car at a dealership and then get the plates the same day. And I helped build that API that interacts with both the state that you're in and then like the software that the dealership uses. And then I built one for the lottery. So when you buy a lottery ticket in the United States and in the UK and in Italy, I helped build that kind of API that interacts with both the state that you're in and then like the system. Um, and those 2 core features, I spent so much time sort of wrangling all these kind of pieces. So like the gateway that you need to proxy that out to the public. How do we issue keys and secure those for each of the states? How do we get data from the state? How do they get state data from us? Like a whole bunch of things that really kind of are annoying. And so that kind of culminated over 10 years of just like this annoyance of like, why is API development so slow? Why does it take so long to put anything in production? All those kinds of things. And then kind of while working at Clerk, very much so was like, man, like how easy auth has become over the years, right? I remember building, you're rolling your own and doing the whole thing from end to end and building features on top of features and then like Auth0 showed up and that kind of made it simplified and then others kind of played into the space and then kind of Clerk and Stitch and everybody else kind of showed up all kind of with this new model and Clerk being this React components after they, were a Ruby gem for a while and then realized that React was the future. We kind of had the same idea, which was like, man, API development really sucks. Like it's tough to do all these things still today. Like, go and research the market and then like nothing has really changed in 20 years. Like it's exactly the same as it was 20 years ago. And so like, why don't we try and make it as easy as possible so that people can have a very similar experience of like, wow, with like 3 or 4 lines of code, now I have API keys and I can validate them and I can protect everything or, rate limit all of my requests across the globe and not have to worry about being bombarded with attacks or anything like that and make it 2 or 3 lines of code and make it really, really reasonable in price. And so we very much took, all the things I learned from Colin and Braden and the team at Clerk and kind of flipped that into this company that we're building now, which is very much focused on APIs and APIs only.
So recently I had Jamie Turner from Convex, the CEO of Convex on, and one of the interesting things that I took away from him was he described software development, especially building things, building things independently, as there almost being kind of like a bell curve of developers, where at the beginning you seem to gravitate towards tools like Clerk and I imagine Unkey, because you're not really familiar with the ins and outs of building authentication or API key management. And then at some point in the middle, and these are the individuals that I seem to interact with, not often, but occasionally they pop up. Then the developers in the middle stating that like, no, we just build it all ourselves, right? And then at some point, the more senior you get, it's like, yeah, just pass it off to a company who knows what they're doing, who can handle all the stuff for me, right? So it's very cool hearing that there are other dev tool companies out there, and there seem to be a lot of these who are creating these almost niche products that seem to tackle a lot of the heavy lifting that is not often associated with the main thing, the core feature that's being promoted, right? So like taking, for instance, Clerk, like we do authentication. And like, yeah, it's easy to create a form that you can simply sign into a website and do, but like, how do you handle, single sign-on with different OAuth providers? How do you handle setting passwords? How do you handle, communicating to the users via text or email? Like all that infrastructure that needs to be spun up. It takes time and effort. And even as you're talking through something like Unkey, like I was a backend developer myself, but it doesn't seem quite to the degree that you were, where a lot of the infrastructure for things like rate limiting were built into whatever platforms we were using at the company that I'd worked for previously. But those are all serious considerations that need to be taken for developers when they're building products, because abuse does exist and it's something that needs to be accounted for. So it's cool that Unkey seems to be really hyper focused on making sure that you're targeting those specific problem areas and then building on top of that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like targeting the right areas. And I think, similar to Clerk, right? We get pushback where it's like, oh, well, I could do this all myself. And then it's like, you could, but,
Yeah.
we'll see you in 3 to 6 months when you've implemented, everything that you need. And now you could have been working on the core platform versus spending your time building infra.
Yeah. So what are the core challenges, I guess, you've encountered while trying to build and grow Unkey?
I think it's, pretty basic stuff that you kind of struggle with. So first, I'm a first-time founder, so that presents its own challenge, right? Which is like I've built loads of products and loads of demos and loads of things in the past, open source or not. But then actually running a whole company and you being like the person in charge was a daunting task. And the first 6 months was really weird because you go from writing code every single day for hours upon hours every day trying to get this product to work, to like this mental shift of like, actually now I'm just like the person in charge of the company and I have to do a bunch of other stuff that doesn't involve coding. And that was a real challenge personally for me, because it's like, well, I've been writing code my entire life and now I get to write code occasionally and it gets less and less as time goes on. But then just as like a generalized company, I think the biggest challenge was getting buy-in from slightly bigger companies that like, hey, this could save us time. Getting regular developers to buy in is very easy because they know that like, hey, I'm building this side project and I don't want to waste a bunch of time on this. I just want to build the cool part. Getting them to buy in is really easy, and having like a free tier that's really generous, and like being able for them to basically scale in. And if their side project does really well, like, hey, they can pay us money. And if it just is one of those side projects that kind of just sits in the back, and you play on it a little bit, and then you add some more features, and it's not super popular, but like you're having fun, then Unkey is a great fit. But persuading bigger companies that, like, hey, you don't need these old legacy archaic products anymore, and like you can do all of these cool things with us, was a real challenge, and still is today. Like, for every one yes, there's probably 10 no's. And then just having like real good plan of like where we're going in the future is also really challenging. Being a builder and like having that fun, like both myself and Andreas are both builders, and trying to rein each other in sometimes, and being like, hey, like, is this actually what we need, like, for our customers, or is this something that we want to build for ourselves? And like, having to rein that in a bit, it can be challenging. But yeah, for the most part, it's just been more about personal growth than it has been about company growth. The company growth comes with the product, and like once people get it in their hands, I think it's very similar to Clerk, right? Where like if one developer at one company gets it in their hands, they kind of like, wow, this saved me so much time. Let me try and promote this within my own company. It's a very similar approach at Unkey. It's very much people playing with the product and then being like, hey, by the way, when we do this project, like we should use Unkey to save a bunch of time. And we're kind of getting that a lot.
There are a couple of things I want to kind of unpack from what you had mentioned. So we're going to tackle them one by one.
Yeah,
The first thing you had mentioned is being, going from coding for 6 months nonstop all day. I imagine those were the early days of Unkey when the idea was first kind of starting to come to fruition and you were starting to get the project off the ground. I think I'd love to hear, I guess, a little bit more about like the steps you had taken in those first 6 months and before the transition. Because again, a lot of the people that this podcast is targeted towards are people who are in the process of building and launching their own things, or maybe thinking about it. And I'm just trying to like lower that barrier of entry, because it does seem like it's a hard wall to like overcome, right? So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So like I guess the first true like 3 to 6 months. So to give people a time frame of kind of how Unkey came about and when we launched and all the other stuff. So the first line of code was written in June of 2023. And we launched in June of 2023. So like we like built and launched the MVP in a matter of weeks. And then we got our funding in October of 2023. So basically from, a few months, we had gone from like, this is a side project to this is like a funded company. And I want to really nail down like the first few weeks of the project. So when we built Unkey, both Andreas and I came in with a mindset of like, hey, let's just reuse anything that we've ever built before to build out some of this platform. So the entire dashboard that we built, that's still kind of in production, it's changed a bit since we built the product, but like the original inception was all things that we'd previously built at other projects. So we were just copying components that we'd used and said like, we can use this for this part, we can use this for this part. We built custom flows for Clerk. That's the only thing that we really like truly didn't use like a reusable component for, was we built custom flows for Clerk from the beginning. And that was a real choice. That was like I just want to actually prove that custom flows work with Clerk. Because I was still working at Clerk, right? So like this project originally was like very much like, hey, we're going to use the products that we work for as part of our platform. So we used Clerk and we used Upstash, and we were using those in the background. And it was very much like a fully open source project. And I really wanted to prove out the fact that Clerk can be used with custom flows, and like it can be worked really well, and it can be really, really like a good example. And basically, I worked my 9 to 5 at Clerk, which was technically a 7 to 4 at Clerk. So I started at 7 in the morning, finished at 4. And then from about 5 p.m. till about anywhere from 10 till like 2 in the morning. So like anywhere from 10 p.m. to 2 in the morning was just me and Andreas working. So Andreas lives in Germany. So Andreas would finish much earlier than I, because they're 6 hours ahead. So he would finish around, like 8, 9 p.m. our time, maybe 10 p.m. On the East Coast. And then I would work additional hours on top of that. And it was all doable. Like we just really wanted this thing to be successful as a side project. We didn't even want it to be a company. We just wanted to give this to people and be like, hey, use this. Like, save yourself a bunch of time. And my advice for those people that are like in that space right now of like, I want to build and I already want to make this successful, or I just want to prove that I can build something that's productionized, is just like, use the time that you have, whether you've got 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day, or maybe you've got 8 hours in a day, and reuse anything and everything as possible. If that means that you use Superbase and then you use Clerk and then you use a bunch of other Resend and you use a bunch of different things to like build your product in the beginning, you can always change that infrastructure later. You can always go and move away from, oh, we didn't really need this, like we just used it to get going really quickly. That's a possibility. But it's all about just going and focusing on the core product and then worry about the rest later. But yeah, for the first 6 months, we basically just like copied and pasted components from everywhere to build the dashboard and focused on the main part, which was our API, which we built from the ground up. And that was the most important thing. But we needed a dashboard and we needed a UI and we needed all these things so that we could, give it to people and allow them to log in. And we did all of that just by reusing things that we built in the past.
That's fascinating. I think that's super. Also, it's very inspirational that you went from basically nothing to a fully funded startup in a matter of, I think, 3 months, if I did the math right.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of that was luck, right? Like I think right time, right place, right people. And to be clear, like we were both very against starting this company when we first built it. So we had launched on Twitter and like 700 people signed up and we got like 750 stars in like the first week and a half. And then in July, we had our first company reach out to us and be like, we want to pay you to use the platform. And we didn't have monetization because we'd not even thought about it. So we were like, oh God, we got to do that now. So like we spent like a couple days like grinding out and building monetization into the platform. And then we had a bunch of founder friends reaching out to us and being like, you should be raising money for this. Like look at the reception that you got. Look at how many people were excited about it and look about what you could build. And we were like, no, we're super not interested in this. I don't care. Like, I'm really happy at Clerk. I'm having a great time, blah, 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 blah. And there's like a Discord DM between myself and Andreas that basically says like, no, we should keep this part-time. We're really, really happy. And then we took an intro and the first VC, who is our lead investor on our seed round, was just like, you guys have got something really special here. And like, I think you could potentially like raise a lot of money for this. And we were like, well, we only want to raise like $500,000 because that would pay for our salaries for a few years, just Andreas and I. We could totally make a company from that. And it went from here's $500,000 to in the end, we raised like 1.5 million. And that was because once he was in, loads of other investors were super excited about the product and wanted to be investors. So it was kind of one of those weird situations where like we just kind of fell into it. And then I'm really glad that we did. And it's been really, really exciting ever since.
Fascinating. I love it. Thanks for sharing that. The other thing I wanted to unpack from what you had said earlier is building features for yourself. Now, one of the common pieces of advice that I hear from other people who are building projects or are getting started is to kind of scratch your own itch, right? Find a problem that's nagging you and figure out how to fix that. But I think it's super interesting that you're saying like down the road, eventually that becomes not necessarily a great thing to do, because although it's built the core thing, you might be wasting your time down the road if it doesn't quite fit the product or fit the market rather.
Yeah, I think it's one of those tough things, right? Like scratching an itch, I think is always good. Like I think people should build things that they're excited about, right? Passionate, and it scratches this itch inside. But the problem with that is that it can be very difficult to be, if you want to make it as like an actual project where it's generating some sort of revenue, whether it's a few dollars a month or a few $100s or a few $1,000s, whatever. It becomes very hard to scratch your own itch and also scratch a bunch of other people's itches.
Okay.
It has to be one of those things where you're like, I can't be the only problem with this this person with this problem, right? Like my whole thing was like, I can't be the only developer that's ever been through all this pain and suffering, and also, my co-founder can't be in the same problem, right? Like that, we're two people. There must be more than two people out there with the same problem. Um, and I think it's just about like, you can make something out of being passionate, but it's also about trying to solve a problem that you think there's other people in the world that are having that problem. And I think that starts to become your passion, right? Is making people successful. Like for me, every day it's like, oh, cool, more people have signed up for Unkey. Let me go and reach out to them and find out what they're building and how we're helping them solve that problem and why are they solving that problem, and is there something missing that we're not solving for them. And then it becomes a like passion project around helping people more than it is about building a product. And so for me, every time, I see someone launching production and they're like using our product, it's like, oh, awesome. Like another person has been solved. And I think that's the same at Clerk too. Like, I think if you go and talk to Colin about like what really drives him forward every day, it's not building the product. It's like helping developers build better products through, user management, organization management, and everything else that they're building every day. And I think in the beginning, it started as a passion project around like, man, authentication sucks. Like, we can solve this problem. And I think like we're starting to turn that corner now, more around like, oh man, every day I get to help one developer is amazing. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think one of the most kind of eye-opening experiences that showed the power of some of these products is when I was at NextConf a couple of months ago. Um, just showing something like the organization switcher inside of
Right.
Clerk and how you can easily just like it's a single line of code, right?
Right.
Toggle in the dashboard, a single line of code, and you have this robust user interface where you can create organizations, invite people, change between them, and the lifting, it's such an easy lift on the developer's part to make all of that happen. So yeah, it definitely is all about creating that user, that experience for the developer to make their lives easier. So before we wrap up, I got one last question for you. I know you've dropped a ton of advice through this episode. This has been so much fun. But I'm going to ask the one question just because I like to end the show on this: is if you have one piece of advice for builders, whether they are in the early stages of building a product or they're kind of thinking about it, what would you tell them?
My one piece of advice. Yeah, I think the number one piece of advice that I give to a lot of people when they come and ask me is just like, just go for it. Like, even if whatever you're imagining, it might not be a winner, right? It might not be the number one thing that you end your career on or whatever. Um, just go for it. The worst thing that happens is you learn a lot about being a builder or being a person that's building a product, and you take that into your next one. And I think if you don't start, then there's no way for you to know if it's going to be successful, if you're going to learn something. And I'll kind of caveat that with a second piece, which is like, try something new when you're building one new piece. So whether that's like, oh, I've never tried out Superbase before, let me try and see how they kind of work. And I think it's super important to kind of test some stuff out and see how they work in your product. And yeah, just go for it. Like, what's the worst that happened, right? Is you get to spend a bunch of time building something cool, and then like maybe it just sits in your GitHub and doesn't do well, and that's the end. Or maybe it turns into something really cool and you get to start a company and raise $1.5 million and then never imagine that's going to ever happen to you. And that was basically what happened to me. I built a bunch of stuff. It didn't really it didn't do great. It did okay, and then that turned into building Unkey, which was super successful. So I definitely think just starting is probably the best piece of advice I can give.
Yeah, building on that, it does really feel like, because I'm a serial starter upper
Right.
myself, kind of thing, right? Like I've never really launched anything to any great success, to be admittedly, but I'm constantly always looking to like kind of build my own ideas. And similar to what you had described earlier, it's almost like building these little side projects and trying to push them into production is a way of like iterating on your own skills, right? So you take a concept, you build on it, and then when you start building the next thing, you can reapply the concepts from the previous project you built on. So awesome. I love all this. This has been a great episode. James, where can people find you if they're looking to connect with you on the internet?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter. That's probably or X or whatever we want to call it this week. I'm there. I'm pretty much there all the time. Same with Blue Sky. Like one of those two is where I spend most of my time. It's just my pretty much my full name. So it's James _R Perkins for Twitter and X, which I'm sure you're including in the notes.
Yep.
You can find me on Discord pretty much in a bunch of different Discord servers. I'll make sure to be in this Discord server. I'll just add it to my extra Discord server, so you can find me in there. And yeah, just anywhere really. Or you can find me at Unkey.com. You can find my contact info. You can have a meeting with me. There's a bunch of stuff I do that you can kind of come and chat with me. But yeah, that's most places that you can find me.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include links, like you said, in the description for the in the show notes for everywhere this gets distributed, which will be on YouTube and your favorite podcast networks such as Apple or Spotify. I'll also leave a link for developers who want to try out Unkey to the quick start, which I believe I saw in the docs
Mhm.
earlier today when I was exploring it. So, so people can jump in and try out the free tier and see if it makes sense for whatever product they're building. But with that, I want to thank everybody for coming and listening to our conversation today. Hopefully, you learned something about building and launching projects. I also want to thank you, James, for joining me today to drop all of this knowledge on the audience. And yeah, I we'll catch everyone in the next one. Have a great day and bye bye.